Back in the spring of 1999, when I was 16, my family moved to a small mountain town in Colorado. I didn't mind the surrounding forest or the isolation at all because I was already an outdoorsy type of person. I enjoyed hiking up the hills and wandering down dirt paths. I quickly became friends with the only other kid my age who lived nearby. His name was Kyle. One evening shortly before the start of summer, Kyle and I had been wandering through the woods and found a narrow river that flowed across the property. Being bored kids, of course, our immediate reaction was to jump in and swim upstream, have some fun, you know. We kept at it until sundown. Instead of packing it in when the sun set down on the riverbank, we kept on swimming. After maybe another 10 minutes, Kyle suddenly became very quiet and gestured for me to come closer to him. When I was within arm's reach, he whispered to me, "Look over my shoulder towards the tree line. I think someone is there," pacing back and forth. I would have immediately dismissed his words as just him jumping at shadows, but the genuine concern in his voice made me pause for a moment. I glanced over to where he had indicated and scanned the tree line for a few wary seconds. I didn't notice anything moving, though. I said something to the effect of, "Either it's an animal or it's just shadows, dude. No one has any business being on this property. Heck, I doubt anyone else knows about this section of the river." That didn't seem to put Kyle's mind at ease at all, though. He turned back around and looked towards the tree line again. There was complete silence. "Did you just hear that?" Kyle asked me. I told him I didn't hear anything. Kyle asked if I would walk up to the bank with him and investigate to see if there was anything there. I told him that if we got out, we wouldn't want to go back in. I kind of wanted to swim some more. Kyle didn't respond. Instead, he swam out towards the bank and climbed out of the water. I continued to swim around like a moronic kid, oblivious to the notion that diving forward into the water in the dark could have resulted in me caving my head in on a hidden rock or something. I'm not sure how much time passed, but I suddenly began to feel very alone. I turned back towards the bank. I didn't see Kyle anywhere. Both of the flashlights were still untouched and lying in the sand by our shoes. I called out for Kyle as I climbed out of the water, but he didn't seem to respond. I picked up my flashlight and scanned the trees with the beam. I called out for Kyle again, half convinced that he was just messing with me. There was only silence. I took a few careful steps into the woods around the area that he had pointed out earlier. I was getting ready to call his name out again when I noticed that he was standing facing away from me several yards away. He was staring deeper into the forest. I walked over to him, but he didn't turn towards me. As I moved closer, I shouted something along the lines of, "Kyle, you jerk, why aren't you answering me?" I reached out to grab his shoulder, but before I could, he slowly raised one hand and pointed a trembling finger towards the shadows. "Can you see that?" "What is that?" I shone the flashlight at his face. I could see he was bone white, and his eyes were as wide as sewer covers. I barely noticed it at the time, but one detail I'll never be able to forget was a single drop of blood running down from his nose. I turned the light in the direction he was pointing and asked what it was like time had stopped in place. My flashlight beam caught a pair of legs and dark pants. I felt my heart skip a beat. The flashlight felt extremely heavy in that moment. If I were in any other circumstances, I would have snapped the beam of light upwards. Immediately, all I could do was slowly raise my arm as if I was fighting gravity itself. The legs simply kept going, and then the torso appeared. When my flashlight traveled all the way up to its chin, I could see this person had a very wide, gummy smile. It was the scariest face I had ever seen. I flipped my __ and dropped my flashlight. I collided with Kyle as I turned, and we both hit the ground. I screamed for him to run, then I took off like a maniac back down the river and back toward the path we had taken, abandoning everything else, including my friend. I lost count of how many times I tripped while escaping. It was at least 6, I think, maybe as many as 10. I continued to leap back to my feet and kept sprinting, using only the starlight between the overhead branches and the distant glow of indoor lights where my house was to navigate. I didn't say anything to Kyle. I was certain I could hear him only a few steps behind me, crashing through the sticks just as I was. I shot through the garage door into the kitchen, screaming bloody murder. My arms and face were bruised and bloody. At some point, I must have lost one of my sneakers as well, but that barely registered. I cried for my parents to call the police. I looked around behind me for Kyle, but he wasn't there. I assumed he'd run back to his own house. I asked my parents to call his parents after the police arrived. I was shaking so badly when the cops came, they seemed concerned I may have been overdosing on something. Then we got a call from Kyle's parents before we could call them. They were checking to see if Kyle had come home with me. The police called in a team of dogs and extra men to scan the area. They located our belongings by the river, but they found no trace of Kyle or the stranger. The search lasted months, and over 100 miles worth of forest was searched, but no trace of them was ever found. To this day, Kyle has never been seen again. There was media coverage at the time, but given that we were in a small town where people get lost in the woods quite often, I don't know how far the story spread. What's probably the most heartbreaking is that Kyle's family is still without any answers. I live with the guilt of his disappearance every day. I doubt I'll ever forgive myself for not stopping to make sure he was behind me. To this day, I'm sure I can recall the sound of his footsteps right behind me as I ran. I don't know at what point he stopped or if that person grabbed him. Another thought crossed my mind numerous times. What if it was never Kyle at all that I heard behind me? This story happened New Year's Eve, 2 years ago. I'm a male, and I was in my 30s at the time. My friend John, who was also 30, and our friend Jane, who was 28 at the time, were drinking with me at our other friend's bar. It's a small place that was not too popular, so our friend behind the bar was quick to refill our drinks as we finished them. After last call, we decided to go get some food for our drunken munchies. There obviously weren't too many options, but we ended up going to a breakfast cafe in the bad part of town. Everything was fine, mostly. We paid and started walking when, on the way out the door, I noticed a shady-looking guy wearing only an open hoodie and no shirt at all. He had baggy, worn-out jeans and was leaning in the hallway for the bathroom right next to the exit. He was watching us closely as we left. As we were walking to the side of the building where our Lyft driver was to pick us up, we noticed this sketchy-looking guy had started following us. He was about 10 to 15 foot behind us. We picked up our pace and jumped in the car, locking the door as well before even greeting the driver. We quickly said our names so he knew we were his riders, and we asked him to pull away. We had a bad feeling. As we pulled out of the lot, I turned to watch that sketchy man I'd noticed. He'd apparently put on a mask while following us and was wearing a single glove on his right hand. I believe he was holding either a firearm or a knife. I couldn't quite be sure, but it looked like a weapon, definitely. The creep was just standing behind a bush, watching us leave. We called the restaurant to report this suspicious behavior. We probably should have phoned the police too, but we didn't really know if we were overreacting or not. This happened probably about 14 years ago when I was 17 years old. I was in a university in California, and I used to go to a local Starbucks by my campus in my free time to get some studying in. It was very hard for me to focus when I was at home. I remember this older guy used to come in a lot and just sit alone at a table, always facing me. He'd order one small coffee and just sit there and stare. It made me deeply uncomfortable, but I was too young to think about reporting it because I didn't think there was really anything to report. After all, it was just some guy staring at me, not trying to approach me or harm me or anything. In fact, I thought maybe some of it was in my head. Over time, though, I began to notice that sometimes he would leave at the same time I did. With this Starbucks, the parking lot was mostly on the ground level of a free parking structure that was just around the corner from the shop. It was usually really easy to get a spot right in front so you could actually see your car from the street. I usually parked right there at the front of the structure. I had never felt particularly unsafe except when I realized he would follow me out. I began to try and make a note of what his car looked like and where he would usually park. He would usually be a little ways away from me, just enough out of sight to not be suspicious. I would always wait for him to leave before I went anywhere because I didn't want him to try and follow me. One afternoon, though, I was heading to my car, and I noticed that this time he'd parked right next to me. The passenger side of the car was right by my driver's side door, and it was very close as well. I didn't see the man inside the car. I just remember having the most awful feeling in the pit of my stomach when I realized he'd parked so close. I rushed to get to my car. It was at the exact moment I shut the door that I realized he had been following quietly behind me. He approached the driver's side of my vehicle. He'd actually reached the door as soon as I locked it. Thankfully, I did it fast enough for him to not get inside because he tried to force open my door a second later. I immediately backed out of the spot and floored it out of the structure. I caught the red light outside, though, which gave the guy enough time to catch up to me in his car. I honestly don't know why I didn't call the cops at this moment. I remember trying to rationalize what was going on in my head and thinking maybe I was making a big deal out of nothing, even though the man had literally just tried to pry open my car door. I know it's stupid, but I was 17. If it were me now at 31, you bet I would have driven straight to the nearest police station. But I didn't know those kinds of things back then. Thankfully, I was at least aware enough to know that I needed to lose him before I went home. I turned into a series of residential streets to see if he would follow me. He did, of course. I sped up and made a bunch of random turns until I was sure I lost him. I then drove another winding path. Home. I never went back to that Starbucks again. I don't want to think about what would have happened had I not been quick enough to lock my door. This happened when I was a senior in high school. Snapchat was how I communicated with all of my friends during that time. In fact, I would bet that Snapchat was the most popular app in the entire school. I went to a pretty large high school, and I really enjoyed it, honestly. Sometime in the fall semester, though, I was added on Snapchat by a new user. It happened on a day shortly after I'd arrived at school. It didn't seem like a bot or anything like that, but I still had no idea who this person was. The username was simply Josh something, and a lot of numbers. After the name of their account was obviously just Josh. There were probably more than a few people named Josh at my school, so I added the account back without giving it much thought. Not long after doing so, this Josh sent me a Snapchat. It was an actual chat, not a picture. He said, "Hi, what's up?" I responded by asking who this was and how he knew me. He claimed that he also went to my school and mentioned the school by name. I believed him and had no reason not to. I don't remember exactly what I said after that, probably just cool or something. We talked very briefly, but I didn't even know what he looked like, so I didn't know if I had a class with him or anything. The conversation didn't last very long, and I stopped talking with him. Within a few hours later on in that same school day, I got another Snapchat from him. Once again, it was also just a chat. I still didn't know what this guy looked like, but he said he wanted to meet me behind the school near the English hallway doors after school. Well, that was kind of weird. Why was he asking me to meet him after school? I didn't know where that exit from the English hallway was. It was rarely used and in the very back corner, in a quieter area with less traffic. I asked him why. He said, "Please, just show up." I really wanted to know exactly who this guy was. I clicked on his username again, but there was no way of knowing. He didn't have a last name listed or any initials either, just Josh and a bunch of numbers. When the school day ended, I did not go behind the school like he asked. I just left through the main side exit and went to my car in the student parking lot. At that point, I got another snap from him. I saw it when I got into my car. He asked me where I was. I left it on open and then started to drive home. The drive home was normal. When I got to my street where I lived with my parents, though, a car followed me onto it. We lived on a quieter street, and I did not recognize this car at all. I pulled into my driveway, confused, and the car kept on going down the street. I went inside, unpacked all my school things, then went into my bedroom. I could see out the window, though, that the same car was now parked on the side of the street just a little ways up. It had parked kind of in front of our yard. This seemed a little bit strange to me. I couldn't tell who was inside of it, though. It was a red two-door sedan, kind of smaller, and looked fairly old, at least 15 years, I'd say. I covered my window and went to the kitchen to get something to eat. Not long after, when I checked again, the car was gone. I forgot all about it, pretty much, and I didn't get any more Snapchats from Josh. I had a pretty normal rest of the day. That night, though, when I got into my bedroom to go to bed, I saw the car was there again. It was parked in the exact same spot from before, same red car as well. I couldn't tell if anybody was inside of it or not. I had a really bad feeling, though. I left my bedroom and found my dad and told him about what was going on. This all just seemed so strange. I didn't know who it was, and I wasn't sure what was going on. I didn't know what my dad would do about it. I figured I should let him know, though. He left the house, I guess to get a closer look at the car. I watched him from the window. Now, I had no idea if anybody was inside or not. It was too hard to tell from where I was. When my dad got about halfway to the vehicle, suddenly it started and sped off in a hurry. It went down the street, shooting past my dad, who was standing in our front yard. When the car was gone, my dad came back inside. He said he'd seen some man driving. We were glad the car had left. I didn't connect the car immediately to the person on Snapchat, but the next morning, I remembered that person. When I looked on Snapchat, I had been blocked by that account. I asked around with some friends at school, and none of them knew who this Josh guy could possibly be. I'm pretty sure it was a grown man who was pretending to be someone from my school. He tried to get me to go with him after school and probably followed me home after I didn't meet up with him like he'd asked me to. It's really creepy to think about if that was, in fact, the case. Good thing, though, is I've never heard from him again or seen the car after. Back when I lived in upstate New York, I had a good friend who we'll call Jacob for privacy purposes. We used to spend the night at each other's houses almost every weekend, usually when we didn't have school, sometimes even during the weekdays. Though we were just really close. Now, this story occurred sometime during the summertime when we had the entirety of every day to hang out. I did have a few other friends close by, but not very many. I deeply disliked socializing, and the fact that almost every other student I'd met in my high school was creepy in their own way kind of put me off from it. One day, Jacob asked if I wanted to spend the night as usual. Of course, I said yes. I was already at his place at the time, so I didn't need to walk anywhere or anything like that. Jacob lived with his family and owned 2 dogs and a cat. One of the 2 dogs was rather large and scary to me. In actuality, though, he was quite gentle and slept next to me and Jacob almost every night. We played for about 3 hours and then went out for a walk in the night. Now, we had this really creepy guy who lived nearby. He would stop by my place all the time, and I'd heard some bad stories from my brother and other friends too. He never actually scared me that much, though, for whatever reason. One thing about this guy is that he never owned a car or anything motorized. I guess he didn't believe in it. Instead, he would ride his bicycle everywhere he went. Anyway, me and Jacob went to the local gas station to get some drinks and chips for movie night. By this time, the other stores were already closed, and Walmart was way too far away to walk to. We didn't really have any other options. We quickly arrived back without anything happening and got back to watching our movies. Partway through, one of his friends gave Jacob a call and requested his help with something. I can't quite remember what exactly it was. Jacob had to step out for a moment to go help his friend, telling me I could use his computer or watch more movies or do whatever I wanted to in the meantime. By this time, it was nearing 2 in the morning, and I thought it would be cool to watch some anime. About an hour into my viewing session, though, Jacob's dog just suddenly started freaking out and barking at the door from where I was sitting on a couch, which was right next to the window that was next to his front door. I looked over to see if I could see anything outside. I could see that some guy on a motorcycle was sitting there, staring right back in at me. I was mostly surprised at first. I thought it was one of his neighbors, But this guy didn't move from where he was at all. The fear was slowly catching up to me. I went to his kitchen to grab a knife and went back to the front door to see if the guy was still standing there. To be honest, I'm a rather passive person, and I wouldn't want to act aggressively to anyone unless they posed a serious threat to me or one of my friends. This guy was still standing there, just completely still, staring inside for about 10 minutes. I finally opened the door and stepped halfway outside so I could run back in without a problem. I showed him the knife, and we continued to stare at each other for another 3 minutes. Eventually, he started up his engine and sped off down the road. I remained on edge for the rest of the time until Jacob finally returned. I told him everything that happened while he was gone. He said it might have been his neighbors. At that time, I agreed with him so he wouldn't get scared himself. He then went to his room and crashed. I, on the other hand, would sleep in the living room. I laid there for an hour, still too scared to fall asleep. It took me forever until I finally did. The next day was pretty normal. We got up, ate breakfast, then got back to some video games. His computer at the time wasn't being used, so I seized the opportunity to check my Facebook. I hadn't done that in a few days. I noticed that one of my friends had also posted that they had woken up for no good reason in the night and seen a creepy guy waiting outside their house, just staring in at them for a long time. As far as I know, no further incidences like that happened. I now live in another state, and my contact with Jacob was growing smaller and smaller every month. Now, I barely talk to him. I was curious about how his life was going, though. He was planning on going to a public school rather than being homeschooled. As for that night, I just can't seem to forget about it. Who just stares into someone's house like that for almost half an hour? It was the most terrifying moment of my life. I mean, if he wanted to get in, all he would have had to do is overpower a small child. Hey, y'all, this took place in the summer of 2012. I just never thought of writing down this story because I was so stunned it happened to me in the first place. So every summer in my city, me and my friends like to make some small campfires and chill in secluded areas. We don't want to have to drive an hour to an actual campsite and pay the camp fee to do so. These usually happen pretty spontaneously. It's a nice last-minute thing to do. There's this one spot near my house that's located by a river. It's really nice because no one usually goes there. The only thing to be worried about are bears because, of course, living in the Pacific Northwest is challenging like that. My house specifically was located right next to some mountains and forest. One particular night at 11 p.m., I decided to go ahead of my friends and meet them at the spot. I wanted to set things up early. I wanted us to just chill out and have a good time once they all got there. The spot I got to had a 2-minute paved walkway I had to go through. Then I had to take a small trail ramping down the right side of the bridge that crosses over the river. Along this paved walkway were 2 lamps located halfway and another at the start of the bridge SL ramp down to the campfire spot. I parked my car at the beginning of the trail on the street and brought my campfire stuff, flashlight, lighter, firewood, small shovel to dig out the pit, etc. I got to the spot, and it was a small sandy beach-like embankment on the side of the river. I set up the chairs and got to digging the pit with only the flashlight illuminating where I was digging. I was just shoveling the sandstand right next to me, nowhere near the water, when all of a sudden I heard this gigantic splash. It was a splash so loud that it could only have come from something large, like a tune-sized rock. I was confused because I was not throwing any sand into the water, so it couldn't have come from me. I shined my flashlight over, but I didn't see anything. I kind of brushed it off, thinking it might have just been something random. As I kept shoveling a bit more, though, I heard another loud splash. At this point, I thought something was falling from up above because logically something must be getting into the water somehow. I pointed the flashlight above where some trees were above the river, but I didn't see anything big enough to make a splash like that. I tried to keep digging, but my heart rate was kind of really going. At this point, I heard a rustling just past the arch of the bridge. I grabbed my light and shined it towards where I'd heard that sound. Hello? No response. In my head, this must be a bear, and I should be getting out of there immediately. But surely I would have seen something that big and any other sign of movement, for that matter. I told myself I must just be hearing things. Maybe my mind was playing tricks on me. I began to hear those noises again. It clearly sounded like leaves being rustled. I shined my flashlight over to that area once more. As I focused my eyes toward the illuminated area, I saw the naked back of a man who was hunched over. I was kind of frozen in anxiety and stress in that moment. Honestly, of all the things I could possibly see, I didn't expect to see the naked back of a person. From the quick analysis my brain could muster up, he looked to be mid-40s, shaved, and medium-built. Like a mix between chubby and absolutely jacked. As I had my flashlight staying on his back, he started to stand up. I noticed he was not wearing any pants either. My next reflex was to start packing up my crap and get the hell out of there. Now I was piecing in my head that he must have been throwing things at me to scare or shoo me away. After using my deductive skills, I proceeded to get the hell out of there with all my stuff in tow. I was carrying all my things with me, walking brisk up the small ramp. I was on the paved path now, out of the forest. I could feel my heart beating in my chest. I checked back frequently behind me to make sure he was not following me. I was in Crocs, mind you. I was thinking that if I had to book it out of there in a hurry, I might regret not being in sport mode from the get-go. I made it to the halfway point, and I got a sense of relief starting to set in, knowing I'd made it safely out of this very scary situation. As I checked back one more time to make sure, though, I noticed something slowly creeping over the ramp. The naked man was crawling on all fours, his head was positioned toward me, staring at me as he made his way to the middle of the paved walkway. He slowly got up from his four-limbed stance and positioned his body to face me. After setting himself into this new position, the man took off into an immediate sprint towards me. I was stunned for a moment before booking it. I ran as hard as I could down the path. My flashlight jumped out of my pocket, and I lost it, but I didn't care. A whole naked-ass man was chasing me at 11 p.m. at night in a secluded forest. I looked back for a split second, and the man was still running towards me like an Olympic runner, still dead naked. He could have my flashlight for all I cared. I wanted to make it get out of this situation alive. I finally burst out of the forest and ran. To my car, which was 30 feet away, I desperately tried to get in like a classic horror movie. I was fumbling, trying to get my key fob to unlock it. I actually dropped my keys at some point. I thought to myself, __, I'm dead. I brushed the thought off though and picked them back up as quickly as I could. I unlocked my doors and threw my things inside before jumping in myself. It felt like an eternity, but in hindsight, it most likely took only 6 seconds altogether. As I tried to guide my key to the ignition, I was fixated on the end of the paved path I was on just a few seconds ago, waiting to see the naked man emerge in a burst of speed. I zoomed out of the area as fast as possible. As I drove away and was now a good 30 seconds from the location of the horror that just took place, I got a call on my phone. It was my friends calling and asking if I'd made it to the spot yet. All I could say to them was, "Guys, do I have a crazy story to tell you?" They pulled up to my house because, again, it was actually close to the campfire area, and I told them the whole story, the exact way I told it just now. They all swore up and down it was not one of them trying to prank me or anything like that. I also knew none of them would try to full sprint at me with their dome out. As we're talking out in front of my house, though, there's a college student who looked like he was walking home. He was going towards the direction of where I just encountered that man. "Hey, wait a minute. Be careful. There's a naked guy chasing people that go across that bridge." The guy responded to me, "Damn, really? __, I got to go over that bridge to get home." All I could say was, "Good luck, man." The next day, I reported it to the police by phone. They sent over an officer so I could tell them further in person and show them the area where I'd seen the man. When we went over to where I initially saw the man's hunched back, they said they didn't find any trace of anyone being there previously. The officer said they would make a note anyway, just in case it happened again. Some of my friends say I encountered a skinwalker. More realistically, though, I think it was probably a homeless man, mentally ill person, or perhaps someone that was way too drunk or high. This happened during the second year of university. I was on my way home from my part-time job. I had to take a detour that night, and so I got home a lot later than I usually would. When I arrived, there was a badly written sign that said the elevator in my apartment block was under repair. Oh great. I staggered over to the stairs and climbed all the way up to my apartment on the 5th floor. I was completely exhausted. When I got to my door, I threw it open and stepped inside, but almost instantly, I became alert. Something felt wrong here. Do you know what I mean when you feel like something's out of place, but you can't quite tell what it is? I don't really know how to explain the sense of alertness I was feeling. Immediately, I flipped on the light switch, but the lights wouldn't come on. I flipped the switch over and over again, but still nothing. I felt fear welling in the pit of my stomach. I didn't know what to do other than investigate further. I headed for the living room and groped along the walls of my apartment in total darkness. When my hands felt the cold steel of the kitchen sink, I stopped frozen in fear. It was at this point that my eyes had adjusted to the darkness, and I noticed someone standing right in the middle of the living room. This person was thin and tall. A faint light from the street was shining in through the living room window. I couldn't make out the person's face or any distinguishable features or what they were wearing. All I could see was their long, thin silhouette. This person was just standing dead still in the middle of my living room, almost completely blending in. I thought I would scream or panic or do something, but I couldn't bring myself to do anything except stand there in fear. I couldn't move at all. The person in my living room slowly started to move towards me. The sound of their feet dragging made sweat run down all over my body. My eyes widened in horror. It was like my body suddenly jumped back to life and gained a mind of its own, like I couldn't control my actions at all. I threw open my front door and leapt out into the corridor of my apartment block. I hit the button for the elevator repeatedly. I panicked as nothing happened. I had completely forgotten in my fear that the elevator was out of order. I ran as fast as I could down the stairs. By the time I hit the ground floor, I was panting. I heard what sounded like someone slowly making their way to the ground floor. I didn't wait to see whatever it was coming after me. I ran as fast as I could to the nearest convenience store. I couldn't bring myself to go back to my apartment. Instead, I couch surfed at friends' houses. This went on for a fair few weeks, for nearly a month even. I can't remember when, but eventually, I did have to go back to my apartment. I went with some friends to grab all my stuff and to move out. Nothing had been stolen or broken. Nothing was out of place. Everything was exactly how I'd left it before I fled that night. It was so strange. I managed to get another place in a different area. I can't stand dark rooms now. I keep a torch by the entrance at all times and leave a light on whenever I go out or go to sleep. It was a horrifying experience. I never found out who that person was, but I often wonder what could have happened to me if I didn't snap out of my trance in that moment. I just kind of try not to think about it so much. My bedroom is on the 2nd floor of my house. There's no patio, porch, or overhang of any kind beneath my windows. A couple of years ago, I was watching TV in bed around 2 a.m. or so when I heard a louder than usual animal sound. It was not uncommon to hear squirrels running around on the roof from time to time or things like that. I didn't really think too much of this noise. It kept on happening, though, over and over, and it started to sound awfully close to the window. It didn't sound like it was up on the roof either. I tried my best to ignore it for a pretty long time. After at least 40 to 45 minutes of being irritated by this noise, though, I banged on the wall in hopes of scaring them off, at least until I could get some sleep. Just 2 quick bangs with my fist. It was immediately answered with 2 bangs on the wall right next to the window from outside. Needless to say, I just about myself and jumped out of bed. Now my living room was a bay window and was on the other end of the house. I could look out my window from that side and see the area below my bedroom window. I hustled downstairs and peeked out. I saw a random man I'd never seen before standing in front of my house below my bedroom window. He had a knife in his hand, and he was rubbing it along the front of my house. I called the police and waited for them to arrive. To my surprise, he never attempted to flee or anything. He just stayed right in front of my house with his knife. Even when they rolled up, he didn't react at all. The police immediately disarmed and arrested him without much struggle. But I never did find out why he was harassing me that night. It really scared me to death, though.